So a video series I did last year, which went down reasonably well, was Steelfur on tour. And I've thankfully been traveling a lot less this year, mostly due to the fact that I had a surgery on my ear in July that meant I couldn't actually get on a plane for about 2 months. So my regular trips back to Ireland and things like that had to be cancelled. But we are in fact once again on tour. So this week's video is coming to you from New York. You can see New York out the window. I was originally going to record this somewhere in Central Park and just sort of as I was walking. But what you can't see is that a tropical storm has blown in and it is raining. So I'm back at the hotel at lunch, just getting my raincoat and some other things. And I figured I'd just record this short video just to talk about where Fab is right now. So in this weekly Fab video, we've got a few things to talk about. We've got this whole count your blessings, question mark, stuff that's going on, and whether or not that's a card that was intended to influence the game as much as it looks like it is, or whether it's something that now that people know about is quite counterable. So we can talk about that. What else is there to talk about? There's I've kind of seen a bit of negative feedback about the judging quality at another large event. This time I think the calling in Sydney, there were some tweets and people getting a bit unfortunate. We could talk about that a little bit, but I don't want to go into it too much. And then I guess just the impact of Rosetta and how good the set feels to me, and how good the meta feels right now. And I mean, when I say the meta feels good, we're not talking with the context of how many Enigmas are doing very well in Lyon this weekend as I'm recording this video, but just in general as to how sort of interesting the game feels in terms of the amount of heroes you can play and do well on. So let's start. I think Count Your Blessings. It's an interesting card. Objectively, if you can gain, I think is 1 plus X, 2 plus X, 3 plus X. So even base printed on the cards, if you run 9 of them, you've got 9 plus 6, 15 plus 3, 18 life gain. And then of course there's the multiplicative, so you can gain I think up to 58 life if you play them all. And obviously that increases the amount of damage that your opponent has to deal from a measly 40 to 94 if you can cast them all. But and this is important, right? So when we think about how much damage a Fab deck can deal, we also have to factor in the fact that, blocking cards with 3 block also take up damage, right? So, it's not just the case that, you have to suddenly clear 94 damage instead of 40. It is very much the case that the turn that they have count their blessings in hand and they try and play it, they're giving you life in exchange for that. Or that, they may not draw all 9 of them by the time that you're dealing lethal damage to them, and they're a card that doesn't block. So we're actually seeing that Count Your Blessings, while being quite effective, aggro decks and things like that are having quite good matches where they're just smashing through the amount of Count Your Blessings that's being dealt. They're using the fact that it's a non-block to basically drive through more damage on the turns when it's drawn, and generally finding ways around the strategy. And then of course there is in the background that silver bullet card of Poison the Well. So if you don't know Poison the Well, it just says the next time you would gain life, you lose that much life instead. And I mean, if someone is playing a Count Your Blessings late game, you've dealt them a load of damage, maybe they're on 10 and they're like, okay, cool, I'll play Count Your Blessings red, I'll gain 8 life, and suddenly you say, well, Poison the Well, now you're on 2. You begin to see there are in fact better ways of, there are big ways of hitting nope on that deck once you're expecting it. So Count Your Blessings good. I'm not surprised that it's doing well this weekend. Once I saw the decks that started to put it in, I was like, okay, Enigma, it's going in there, it's going in all these other decks to try and gain life. And the decks that already want to slow the game down, so I wasn't surprised to see them do well, but I'd be very surprised if sort of long term, those decks following that strategy can continue following that strategy. It feels like a very day one meta. It feels like a very sort of day one approach. So not to say there won't be a deck that it isn't home in, isn't good in long term, but for me I feel like it's not going to be the way that people think it's going to be on if you looked at the results this weekend, it's not going to keep that up. So keep that in mind. I could be wrong. I'm not going to make some weird promises I've seen some people promise that if Count Your Blessings was good, they were going to eat one of the cards. That's not me. Though I probably could cook up recipes that I would enjoy eating TCG in. I'm not ever going to do that because I don't see the point of ingesting paint into my body, except when I'm painting Warhammer Oh, as an aside, before we move on to the next topic, I have started painting Warhammer. I've never done it before, but I'm 34, and as a 34-year-old man with dyspraxia, I'll tell you the thing I really wanted to do was get into painting models, because that's going to be great for my hand-eye coordination and not difficult at all. No, it's really, really hard to paint miniatures with dyspraxia, but, you know, I've got someone who's offered basically to teach me in terms of answering my questions and giving me a paint strategy, a paint guide. For the models, I bought the Skaven Tide box. So I have tons of models to practice on, and I'm just not rushing, and I'm not seeking perfection. And I think that's important when you're tackling, you know, something that you are limited in doing by your disability or your neurodivergency. You've got to accept that perfection may be out of reach, but that does not mean that you cannot enjoy the process. So that's it. I've started painting Warhammer, I started painting Skaven. I'm also looking at painting 40k, but I'm very much like, when I'm doing the Skaven, I'm really enjoying the bigger models. So I've got my Warplock Rattling Gunner, my Warplock minigun or cannon or whatever it's called. I've got my Norlord on a Claw Beast, and all that kind of big models, and rat ogres and stuff like that. Those are really fun. So when I'm looking at Warhammer, I'm looking at the models that have, the armies that have very low model count, and that also kind of really appealed to me. So I've started to look at Adeptus Custodes. Convenient. I'm also wearing a yellow t-shirt. And I've started to look at Imperial Knights, though I've heard they're a bit polarizing in their gameplay. But I'm not getting into it now because I've got tons of miniatures to paint, and even if I want to, I also have the Stormcast Eternal side of the Skaven Tide box that I bought, which I'm either going to sell or paint. So I can do all of those before I move on to 40k. I can wait for the new Imperial Knight Codex that's going to come out next year. But basically the idea of playing a low model count army really appeals to me. Because obviously the bigger the model, the theoretically easier it will be for me to paint it with my disability. So that's just a bit of a side. Moving on then, just to judge drama. So we had the whole resolution of the Kaiser Wang stuff. You know, no comment really from LSS or the judge team, as, you know, we continue to be disappointed by. He put out a statement basically saying that he disagrees with his decision. He feels it's unfortunate. A few people have backed him up. We're still in a position that I flagged before, which I'm not really happy with, where the only voice that is commentating really on a player's banning is himself, and, you know, people who are also biased towards him. I feel like we're in a really, I consider it kind of a tricky situation, where if we allow that sort of method to continue, whereby, you know, there's no comment from LSS, there's no comment from judging teams about decisions that were made, where the only voice is the players, I think we're asking for trouble down the line. I feel like we're asking for trouble, like, if someone, not like me, but someone, you know, with a very positive public profile decides to cheat or gets caught cheating, and, you know, some people are like, well, okay, I don't believe that person did it, right? You know, we need credibility, I think, is what I'm trying to get at. And I think we need a flowing method of communication, you know, like where there is a believable report that isn't too long, doesn't go into too much depth, from LSS that just gives their reasons for banning someone. And I mean, the community is already going to make a decision. They're already going to witch hunt someone, or they're already going to chase someone down if they think they did something wrong. Like, but the difference between there being a clear message about exactly what was done wrong versus what people are thinking was done, or what people assume was done, or what the player themselves said was done, because they're going to try and paint themselves in the most positive light possible. So I feel like we are moving to a point where we need to get a little bit more disclosure. I'm not saying LSS needs to write a 3-4 page, even 2 or 1 page report on everything that happens with every judge decision, but I think if we're getting to a stage where, you know, that, and we're firmly at the stage where thousands of pounds are on the line, in terms of, like, you know, qualification prize money at these large tournaments, and people are being DQ'd from those events, we are getting to a situation where it does start to be a good idea to have a bit more transparency about those very high level decisions. So I'm not saying that if your judge DQs you from a ProQuest, right, that LSS should have to write a report about it. But, you know, I think if someone gets DQ'd, for example, at Worlds, which did happen on the top 8 of the second day, and one person got DQ'd and the other person got a game loss, the person who won the tournament then went on to be the person who would not have gotten in without those changes. So it didn't just affect their match, it affected the entire outcome of Worlds, right? So having, like, no clear public statement about why that ban was decided on, why that level of punishment was decided on, I feel just does a disservice to the sort of integrity of the competitive state of the game. And I feel like that's something that could be readdressed. And I think it would be quite good to establish a positive, a positive communication pathway on these kind of things, just to give a bit more rationale and understanding behind decisions. Now, I've heard people argue against this, saying, oh, you're just creating witch hunts, you're creating more opportunities for people to argue with LSS. And it's like, well, how do I put this? If LSS are repeatedly making decisions that the public disagree with, then that's fine. Like, the public disagrees, and LSS can take that feedback on board, right? So for me, it's a feature of the system that LSS will get actual feedback into their decisions rather than a bug, right? If a judge continually makes the wrong calls at high level events at the highest level, and people get annoyed at them, again, it's a feature. It's not a bug. It's good. Like, I'm all for protecting judges, and I'm all for protecting the pathway to judges and making people know that they're going to be supported and not be left out in the cold or left to face community's wrath. But I'm also for accountability. At the moment we have what feels like a very detached system where you've got the community, you've got sort of this veil of mist to keep things in favor with the set that just released, or the old set that just released, and a lack of clarity. And I feel like that does a disservice to what players need. And ultimately, like, we need judges, and that is true, and we need to protect them and encourage them. And people won't want to do it if they feel like they're going to get abused or beaten up by the community. But equally, if you want to be one of the best judges, if you want to be top quality world's level judge, getting paid as much, getting flown across the world to do it, then accountability is what you signed up for, unfortunately. And the players are the biggest stakeholder of the judging program. So if you do one decision people disagree with, and you can just be like, well, look, this is the one time you guys are going to disagree with me, but this is why we did it, that's fine. And if you repeatedly keep doing stuff that people don't agree with, well, then that's a question, right? Are you making the right calls? Is the judge policy written correctly? Do the rules need to be rewritten? Like, there's all these questions and debate that can come when there's a little bit more transparency. And until we have it, I think there are issues there. What was the final thing I was going to talk about? We're going to talk about judging. We're going to talk about CYB. Oh, we're just going to talk about the meta. So I'm just really happy to see the meta that has developed. And there's a lot of Enigma, but I do think that's like a bit of a blip. I think we'll see a bit of a drop off in Enigma. I'm happy to see people like Florian and Verdance doing well. I'm really happy to see stuff like KO still doing well. Even Zen is still doing well. There was one in the top 24, I think, day one of Leon. So generally it just feels like the meta is quite healthy. There's a lot of decks out there. I feel like Enigma is a bit of a beast, but I feel like, Illusionist players have been repeatedly targeted by aggro, so A, it's okay for Enigma to have a bit of a time in the sun, and B, people can play Zen, people can play other decks that target Enigma better if she's winning. So I don't think there is, I don't think we were in a situation like we were with Zen, where there's like best deck in the format and then a huge gap and then everyone else. I feel like we're in a really good situation, and I have been really enjoying my games of Fab. So if you agree with that, let me know, or if you disagree, do just post it in the comments below. But this is the end of Steelfur Speaks on tour. This is a view out of my window. I'm somewhere in Midtown, and I am going to go and explore the city again now. I'm going to get my raincoat, and I'm going to head out into the tropical storm that's brewing. And we're going to have a good time, because when you're on holiday, you have to have a good time. Adios.